I'm going to just very quickly whip through this presentation. I mean, in many ways, this could have been radically changed based on what's been happening over the last couple of days or so. So, in a way, forgive me, it's already out of date in many ways, sort of, of what we're dealing with. I've tried to link it around some of the problems that we face, and really, I now should put pandemic at the bottom of this one as well, sort of in terms of the P's, and then go on to potentially maybe a more positive. What are some of the solutions in terms of dealing with this? These will be all things that you're very familiar with, and I would hope maybe stimulate some of your research interests in trying to pick up some of these areas, trying to provide us with more data and information sort of around a whole range of different things. So firstly, about people and the workforce. We know government have made commitments. It was originally 5,000 GPs, it's now 6,000 GPs, and yet we're going backwards rather than forwards. And when you look at headcount sort of and full-time equivalent, you can see actually the number of salaried GPs and the number of partners starting to sort of widen, and this desire increasingly of younger doctors to become salaried or locum rather than become partners, and how we address those issues. When you look at the data looking across countries, this is a pattern sort of that we're seeing sort of where as the population rises, the number of GPs per head of population falls as well. So putting more workload pressure on you, but not just you as well, sort of in nationwide, but across different regions of the country. You can see sort of how in different parts of the country they're having really acute problems with recruitment and retention and the workforce issues around that. But it isn't just about GPs. We know in many parts of the country it's practice nurses that is one of the big problems, trying to find both recruit and then train the necessary skilled nurses. So you can see here sort of the trajectory around practice nurses, but increasingly in many practices looking for more skilled practice nurses, the whole range of advanced nurse practitioners or district nursing community matrons working in practices, whole range of different titles and nomenclature developing around trying to provide sort of an alternative to the GPs that practices can't find, and yet finding practice nurses as well can be a challenge. But it isn't just about nurses anymore. Now increasingly, and you'll see that in all parts of the UK, the focus is around different skills as well, other healthcare professionals who can work alongside us. So practice is already sort of doing this before the advent of PCNs in England or clusters elsewhere in the UK. We're seeing pharmacists embedded in practices, increasingly paramedics, physician assistants, you name it, anybody with a pulse who can come and work in general practice, we'll train them up and keep them and enable them to work sort of productively alongside us as part of our widening team. One of the things that we need to be careful of, though, is that we focus very much on the frontline clinicians, but actually the back office staff, the front of house staff, the reception staff, the admin team, the practice managers, and others as well, really important members of our practice team. Actually, they're fairly flatlined in terms of the recruitment numbers over the last few years, and their workload is going up as well. So let's not forget the rest of the team, sort of, who maybe the political focus isn't always on. But one of the problems that we have is actually having the funding to be able to support this. This is the funding as a share of investment going in from the NHS into general practice. And you can see how we had that high watermark back in 2006, and then it's dropped down and started to creep back up again. You can see it maybe better on this slide. But you can see how that upward tilt, which has happened over the last couple of years, has flatlined already. So we're stuck at this 8.1%. I know the college has been really proactive at trying to get 11% investment into general practice. We count things in slightly different ways, so you can't necessarily compare the 8.1 with the way that sort of the college measures things, but nevertheless, it's the same story. We are not investing enough as a nation in general practice, and we need to turn that around. So the next P is pressure, workload. I mean, because you haven't got the workforce, because you haven't got the GPs, because we've got more patients, the pressure and the workload is increasing, but also because of the complexity, the increased multimorbidity. You as researchers will know very much sort of, that complex nature of every consultation is becoming much, much more difficult to deliver within the typical 10-minute time frame. And we have to really try and address that, enable GPs to spend longer with their patients and to be able to address that. But we need more people and different ways of working to be able to do that. Increasingly now, the NHS is starting to count data. So this is, again, England data, sort of in the monthly recording of appointment data, but it's very rudimentary sort of in its information that you can provide. It doesn't really tell you why people are waiting 2 or 3 weeks for an appointment, but it just counts basically the numbers. It doesn't tell you anything about the quality of what's going on. And we know sort of, that the numbers are interesting to politicians. They have their constituents telling them they cannot get a GP, and so it makes headline news. You see, as we saw in the last election, it becomes a real thing about getting an appointment with your GP, and the government's commitment for 50 million appointments in general practice, not necessarily with your GP, is something that they've made great play around, and something which we are utilising to try and secure the additional changes that we need as a result of that. But the workload change is absolutely evident in terms of the rising number of appointments. So what impact does this have on the people, on the professionals, on GPs particularly? The GMC have done a useful survey last year which looked really in detail at GPs' morale sort of and views around what was their beliefs, and compared them sort of with others, and maybe come as no surprise to you that maybe GPs were right down at the bottom sort of in terms of their morale sort of and feelings sort of about what's happening in terms of their workload pressures. And so you can see there the figures. Those who were less than full-time, maybe a little bit better sort of than those who were full-time, but not a huge amount. Generally everyone was feeling the pressure of workload. The reasons for dissatisfaction, again, this will come as no surprise to you at all. GPs feel particularly concerned about the increased workload pressures, the long hours, the bureaucracy that increasingly we're having to contend with, the pressure of time constraints, and feeling that care is being compromised. You haven't got the ability to look after the patient in front of you or on the end of the telephone, or maybe at the end of a video consultation increasingly, in the way that you want to and feel you're able to if you had the necessary time. But there are GPs who feel good about things, and there are a number of them, and we need to recognise that and learn from what it is that makes you feel good about being a GP, why you want to stay working as a GP, particularly those who feel fulfilled by the work that they're doing, who feel valued, who have enjoyable sort of patient contact, who like being and feel respected as part of a team, recognising the benefits of working in a team, that time, the downtime sort of in between surgeries and other types of practice meetings that enable you to feel valued and supported really makes a difference. So how do we deal with managing workload? There's a whole range of suggestions here. I'm sure many of you are sort of adopting those already, but increasingly recognising your safe limits, setting some boundaries, pushing back and saying no when it's appropriate to do so, because it's important to respect your own space and autonomy sort of as part of making that decision about what's safe for you. But increasingly, as I'm quite sure will be the case for many of you, having a portfolio sort of working arrangements, doing research, doing academic work alongside clinical work, maybe some management roles, maybe appraisals, maybe education. There is a whole range of opportunities for GPs, and we're quite fortunate in having that opportunity. Another P is pensions. This is why this is out of date, because you'll have been aware that there was an announcement by the Chancellor yesterday in the budget. He suddenly found lots of money hidden under the mattress and has decided to spend it increasingly as well, focusing on what we've been calling for quite a long time, is the need to address the pension issue that limits many doctors from working additional amounts of time when they feel able to do so, because they're actually being paid, so they're paying the service for working. So effectively it was punitive to work sort of in some situations, and that was also a factor why lots of doctors were thinking about retiring or reducing their workload commitment. So there's announcements yesterday about increasing the annual allowance, so we're pleased about that and addressing that. And we're sending out today a letter to all GPs around issues relating to their in-year tax allowance charges that they might be liable to. So watch out for that. That's coming out today. But there are still sort of other outstanding issues. We've been challenging government around unlawful pension changes. Should you be suspended? And this idea that sort of potentially could lose your pension as a result of that suspension, which was complete ridiculous sort of situation. We've challenged successfully around that. But there's also still an outstanding major issue around the transition from the old pension schemes to the new scheme, and the firefighters and judges have demonstrated that that is illegal, and the government have recognised that, so there is potential for further changes in the pension arrangements going forward. Another big P is premises. We've heard great announcements around 20 new hospitals. Well, where's been the announcement about 200 or 2,000 new GP practices, or the extension that you need to have facility for training, or when we've got the new staff coming into our premises and practices, where are they going to sit, where are they going to consult, how are we going to actually provide them with the necessary space to be able to provide good quality care. So solving the premises issues is very much an outstanding problem that we need to address. We've also got problems around rental arrangements and sort of the challenge, the legal challenge that we're making around NHS property services who are charging exorbitant rents for practices, and that's not being reimbursed. Lots of issues around premises which we're wanting government to solve. And then our friends PCSE, the Primary Care Support Agency, that don't seem to do much supporting for many practices, causing lots of bureaucracy problems, many for our practice manager colleagues really struggling on a day-to-day basis still, even after years of this contract not delivering in the way that they should do. And then a final P, missing off the pandemic, which I didn't put the slide on, is the place, GP at hand. So I think this is a challenge in a way, sort of that we need to recognise. People are working in different ways, but this causes problems. It causes and widens health inequalities. The recent Ipsos Mori survey done last year demonstrated that patients who are largely well, sort of, who are sort of mobile, sort of, who are using sort of their mobile phone on a regular basis will use it sort of, to dial up GP at hand in the same way that they might do 111, but actually don't realise necessarily that they're re-registering with that practice as part of that arrangement. But it might suit them as a way of consulting. But it means, because of the way that our system is operated and funded, you end up sort of with some practices sort of with the more challenging patients, the complex patients, whilst another practice starts to cherry pick sort of the relatively easier patients to look after. So a real health inequality issue that needs to be addressed as part of this development. So what are the potentials for change? How can we deal with some of these issues? So again, stretching it a little bit, PC and pixels, well, it's the digital sort of arena. We've got a Secretary of State very enthusiastic about this. These are the changes that we agreed as part of our contract change last year, but I think we're going to see a step change in the coming weeks. Be prepared for this, because with the now pandemic, sort of, the COVID spread, we will wholesale be moving to telephone triage, triaging patients, increasingly online consultations, and maybe a strong desire for the NHS to roll out much more rapidly the facility to enable you to do video consultations or other types of online consultations, having systems at the front end of your practice to try and demand manage and support patients without them needing to contact you in the first place as a clinician, or maybe navigating them to other services who can provide them with support and care. So this is going to be a big issue over the coming weeks as we really see a step change in the rollout to practices, and that might well change our way of consulting indefinitely beyond these next few weeks as we cope with the COVID crisis. Primary care networks, some may love them, some may hate them. Again, this is why this slide is out of date. We had a conference of local medical committees yesterday who were less than complimentary to primary care networks and the various elements of the regulatory arrangements and direct enhanced services arrangements. But nevertheless, I do think that there is a real opportunity in terms of the basic ways that sort of primary care networks in England are developing to work with one another, to support one another, particularly as we move into this time of crisis, sort of, in terms of dealing with an infection. If you've got one practice that's really struggling because they've got lots of people off sick, another practice potentially can provide some support and cross-cover in ways that we can find and work around over the coming weeks. But also, it provides an opportunity for us to expand that workforce. As part of our contract agreement in England, we have secured 100% funding for 26,000 additional staff to come and work alongside us, to support us, recognising that there aren't large numbers of GPs hanging around doing nothing. So we need to actually bring in new members of staff alongside us and expand, as I mentioned earlier, what some practices are already doing, that skill mix in our practices to work alongside us, to employ those people in our practices to really make a difference and to get them feeling that they're part of this wider primary care team. These are the service specifications that NHS England are expecting some of us to be delivering, so as part of the deal around the primary care network. And that's something that's been a real challenge in terms of bringing some of those expectations down to a more realistic level. But the primary care networks have really important people in place now, the clinical directors. We did a survey of them last year, and we had our primary care network clinical directors conference just a few weeks ago. And this was what they were saying before the service specifications came out last year. So I just snapshot in time. They'd only really been in place literally for a few months. But they were a fairly confident bunch of doctors who felt that if given the right space and time and support, they could make a difference. This is a group of doctors who have been enthused by the potential of what they could do in their communities. But they're already under pressure. The workload pressures that they're finding is difficult, and we really need to avoid overwhelming them with expectations. And we need jointly to protect them and support them as best as we're able to do. One of the quotes from our survey was, "We have great ideas, but we cannot work at the pace that we want to. So we just need to have some space and time, some thinking time, some support time, developmental time, organisational development as well, something that the Royal College of GPs have been very keen to advocate." Another P is people. Clearly people are part of the solution. There's a problem with people, there aren't enough of them, but if we get people in place, then actually we can start to address some of the issues that we have. And as I've mentioned, as part of the deal in England, we've now got the potential for every primary care network. So a typical size primary care network is about 48,000 population. They would have an additional 21 people working in their practices over the next 4 years. So that's a significant addition, particularly the skills that they may bring. So if every practice has a pharmacist, what difference that could make in terms of the quality of prescribing, the benefits to patients sort of, around dealing with sort of some of the trickier areas that many clinicians dodge around, opioid issues, antibiotic prescribing, maybe switching patients from particular inhalers to less carbon burning inhalers. So I think there's lots of areas that pharmacists can really support us in terms of our auditing activities sort of within our practices. And similarly with paramedics and maybe developing a home visiting service. So not just for those in care homes, but for our housebound or frail patients. And supporting a dedicated team across a primary care network may start to again change the way that we work as GPs, but without necessarily removing that continuity of care that everybody so values and is so important to the future quality of delivery of services. So it gives us the opportunity and flexibilities to work in slightly different ways. A clear P is pounds. We need the resource to be able to make this work. As part of our contract deal in England, we have secured significant resource to go into supporting both practices and their core contract, but also practices working within their primary care network. And you can see how the funding has changed up to £1.4 billion by 2024 to support the workload developments in our practices. And also a new scheme, something which will be maybe worth looking at sort of as part of sort of your research projects, the benefit of working and incentivising practices to work at a system-wide level, sort of at a PCN level. So in a way a little bit like QOF, but working sort of across a group of practices. And this will be the scheme that will start from April and then develop into quite a significant resource that practices will potentially be able to gain and utilise in their practices if they achieve the various areas. This is how the scheme will operate in this next year. So you can see various domains, a bit like QOF. There'll be upper and lower thresholds, a bit like QOF. And these are the areas that we're focusing on, supporting and encouraging greater uptake around seasonal flu, learning disability checks, some issues around social prescribing use, and some prescribing issues as well. People, again, coming back to where I started, sort of, I think finding more GPs and retaining more GPs is going to be really important and is still really important. And there's a whole range of initiatives that we've been involved with. The college is involved in these areas too, about supporting particularly the investment in GP training and not just increasing the numbers, but actually providing more space for people to work in general practice. So moving from the traditional 18 months in hospital and 18 months in general practice to 24 months in general practice where you can genuinely learn to be a GP in a better way. supporting senior colleagues to mentor younger doctors, sort of, through the fellowship scheme, and also supporting colleagues returning to work in more positive ways, and not forgetting our colleagues who are locums and connecting them in with a primary care network, maybe through the support of CPD. And then the final P is partnerships. I was pleased that the previous Secretary of State took my idea up of having a partnership review. I do believe that the independent contractor model of working has succeeded over many years, has been very resilient, is adaptable to change in a way that other systems may be less so. But actually, we know, as I said earlier, many younger doctors looking at being a partner as being too risky, too difficult, too onerous. We need to address all of those issues, and we're starting to try to do that. And we've also tried to identify some additional resource of £20,000 for a doctor who chooses to be a partner from April. So areas to work on. So finally, how do we release the potential in general practice? This is things that you know very well, and it's not rocket science. You don't have to really think too hard to actually know that it is about the proper and consistent level of investment. It is about valuing our workforce and expanding our workforce to help cope with the increased work and increased complexity in general practice and in community-based services. It is about improving our IT and digital infrastructure to enable us to deal in a modern 21st century way and being open to new ways of consulting as part of that. It's about reducing our risks and reducing some of those liabilities that currently fall on us. It's about rebuilding and reconnecting with our primary care team, reconnecting with our district nurses and social workers and community physios and others besides. It's about reducing bureaucracy and getting rid of those things that we really don't need to be doing because others just expect the GP to pick up everything in ways that we really shouldn't be doing. And then, as a result of all of that, improving the quality of care that we provide to our patients. And if we do that, then going back to that GMC survey, we will ultimately improve the morale of our GP colleagues. They will feel that they're going to work having the space and time to engage with their patients in a positive way, and they will feel better as a result. And if they feel better, they're likely to stay longer in general practice. Thank you very much.